Today, we're going to be looking at data from the 2021 NFL season to prove if two of the most common pieces of fantasy football knowledge are actually true. On top of that, based off our analysis, I'm going to be giving you multiple players to target in your drafts this season. Let's get to it. Number 1, mobile QBs are the better fantasy asset. This one is true for the sole reason that a mobile quarterback provides a higher weekly floor than a QB that's just a statue in the pocket. There's an important caveat though. You do not have to be a mobile QB in order to have an elite ceiling in fantasy football. But first, let's talk about floors. Looking at this chart, we can see that QBs with over 80 rushing attempts guaranteed a QB2 finish, with the lowest scorer netting about 230 points, placing him at QB 15 overall. That player is Lamar Jackson, who missed 5 games completely and left Week 14 after only attempting 4 passes and rushing twice. However, we can also see that the top performers are not only the QBs that can run. So looking at this data, you can see what I've already told you. A QB that gets a high number of rushing attempts every game is one of the safest assets from week to week in fantasy football. However, to be one of those elite QBs in a single season, the only thing you need to have is a high-performing offense. The implication for this piece of fantasy football analysis is that Trey Lance is a must-draft at his current price point. Now, I understand that Jimmy Garoppolo is still on the roster, but I would be amazed if he isn't traded. And even if he isn't, I think the 49ers will either just cut him or start Lance over him. Don't misinterpret the situation in San Francisco. We're not dealing with Jordan Love 2.0. The 49ers moved up and gave up massive draft capital to select Lance with the 3rd overall pick. He's not sitting this year. So not only is he the starter in an offense surrounded by weapons, but he's a lock to reach the 80 rushing attempt benchmark that guarantees QB2 status. In the games that Lance had meaningful playing time, he averaged over 10 rushing attempts per game. Add on top of that, he is currently the 15th ranked QB on ESPN's rankings. Now, you should almost never follow ESPN's rankings in your draft, especially this early. But what you do need to do is analyze your host site's rankings to see what players they are crucially undervaluing. The point here being that Lance is stepping into a great offense that gives him an elite ceiling regardless of his rushing ability. And even if you don't think that he's a polished passer, it doesn't matter. He'll run the ball enough times that he's guaranteed to return value where you're currently picking him. In 2 QB leagues, he's a must-have this season, and in 1 QB leagues, I think he's the best late-round target available. Year after year, we see his second-year QB burst onto the fantasy scene. And I'll prove it to you by looking at the last 5 years. So these first 2 years are from fantasydata.com because ESPN doesn't give scoring leaders past 2019. Regardless though, in 2017, Carson Wentz finishes the QB5. Then the following year, Patrick Mahomes was the QB1 in 2018. Then Lamar Jackson was the QB1 and Josh Allen was the QB9 in 2019. Kyler Murray was the QB5 in 2020. And finally last year, Justin Herbert was the QB2, Joe Burrow was the QB8, and Jalen Hurts was the QB9, all in 2021. And those are all sophomore year QBs. Out of all the sophomore QBs this year, Lance is surely in the best spot because of the overall quality of his offense and his rushing potential. While other players like Justin Fields may have that same rushing potential, the Bears' offense cannot compare to the 49ers. Lance is simply a player you cannot walk away from your fantasy draft without. The second idea that's been etched into fantasy football players' minds is that volume is king at the running back position. And the data that I've looked at kind of shows that this isn't necessarily true. So to analyze this, I looked at 2 measures as they relate to running back fantasy football production: volume and efficiency. Volume was measured by a player's total touches on the season, and efficiency was measured by a point per touch metric that I calculated. Now, it's important to note that this efficiency is from a fantasy football perspective and a PPR lens on top of that. That means that this efficiency means nothing in terms of actual NFL value, and that pass catching backs, as expected, are going to be more fantasy efficient in a PPR league. That said, a running back that has a high TD rate could also be fantasy efficient using this metric. First, let's establish an important point. There is no correlation between efficiency and volume. Just because a running back gets limited touches doesn't mean he will be hyper efficient with them. And the same applies to a running back that's getting a massive workload. That said, efficiency and volume are both separately highly correlated to fantasy football success. To be an elite asset, you either need to be a workhorse back like Najee Harris or be extremely fantasy efficient with your touches like Austin Eckler. Or you can be Jonathan Taylor and essentially do both. So there are a lot of important takeaways from this data, but let's establish something first. For the most part, the fantasy community can sniff out volume. Barring extreme circumstances like an injury or a holdout, you're almost never going to find a running back that hits high volume in the later rounds. Some of these outliers, though, are players like James Conner in 2018 and James Robinson in 2020, who were either undrafted or selected in the last round of very deep leagues. That means we need to identify the middle to late round running backs that might not have crazy volume, but have the potential to be very fantasy efficient. Since touchdowns are impossible to predict season long, this essentially boils down to identifying the running backs with the potential for great receiving seasons. So let's get into the running backs you should target. The first two are Aaron Jones and Travis Etienne. Aaron Jones is currently ranked as the RB13 and 21st overall in ESPN's rankings. Part of that RB2 ranking is the growing presence of A.J. Dillon, who will expectedly cut into more of Jones' share of touches. However, Dillon is not a pass-catching back, meaning that Jones will get almost all of the receiving work out of the backfield in an offense led by Aaron Rodgers that also lost 241 targets this offseason. And the only replacement was second-round pick Christian Watson. Now, typically, Rodgers has not meshed well with rookie wide receivers, meaning that Jones has the potential to be one of the most targeted backs in football this season, even if he doesn't have full command of his backfield. Next, we have Travis Etienne, who similarly is expected to split a backfield in Jacksonville with James Robinson. Now, in college, we saw Etienne excel as a pass-catching back. For a team whose leading target was Marvin Jones last season, there's a lot of pass-catching potential for Etienne. While yes, the team brought in Christian Kirk on a monster deal, I'm willing to take the bet that Etienne will see a decent number of targets, especially when the price tag is RB24 and 59 overall in ESPN's rankings. Now, this third running back is admittedly more of a gamble. And even worse, it's a gamble on the potential for touches. That third player is Chase Edmonds. So Chase Edmonds is currently ranked as the running back 34 and 98 overall in ESPN rankings. And that's the primary reason that I think there's value in selecting Chase Edmonds. He's ranked immediately behind or ahead of the following players: Michael Carter, Tony Pollard, A.J. Dillon, and Rashad Penny. Those are all players who, barring an injury, are cemented in committee backfields. Michael Carter and Rashad Penny just had their teams use high draft capital selecting a running back in this year's draft, which essentially guarantees a cut in their workloads and a committee rotation this season. For Michael Carter, he may not even see the field much because of how good Breece Hall is and the draft capital that the Jets invested in him. For Pollard and Dillon, they're stuck squarely as the 1B option in their backfields, behind Ezekiel Elliott and Aaron Jones, respectively. The Dolphins spent a decent amount of money to sign Edmonds this offseason, and the competition that people are mainly worried about are Raheem Mostert and Sony Michel. Now, I hate to be the one to break this to you, but Raheem Mostert is not that good. Don't get me wrong, I love him in Madden. He's great on there. He's got a lot of speed, it's awesome. But in real life, he's not the running back that people seem to think that he is. In his best season, and let me stress that, his best season, he didn't even have 1,000 scrimmage yards. He got close, sure, yeah. He had 952. But that was 2 years ago. And he is now a 30-year-old running back with an injury history longer than your grandma's panties. As for Michel, while yes, he's had a significantly better career than Mostert, he's going to see no work as a receiver. And on top of that, I think the fact that the Dolphins were able to sign him this late in the offseason and for less money than Mostert gives you an idea of what NFL teams think of Sony Michel. And if you're going to ask me about Myles Gaskin, the mere fact that the Dolphins have signed Mostert and Michel is reason enough to tell you that the coaching staff does not trust Gaskin to handle this backfield. Ultimately, I'm not trying to say that Chase Edmonds is going to have a 300-touch season, just that he has a lot higher potential for touches than people are currently giving him credit for. He's also in an offense that defenses can't stack the box against anymore because of the addition of Tyreek Hill. And he's going as the running back 34. There's extreme upside here with a very minimal price tag. So in my opinion, he's very much worth the dice roll at his current value. Either way, thank you guys so much for watching the video. Please leave a like, subscribe, tell me in the comments what you think, and I'll be back soon with some more analysis. Thank you.